welcome, guys. Can I kick off with a first question? And I guess I'm particularly interested what Lee and Tiff might want to say to this question. Sorry to pick you out first, guys, but you're on the spot. The question I've got for you has come from Who Cares Scotland, and it's what would you like to say to practitioners watching who are writing care records for young people in care today? Lee, would you be okay to respond first there?
Hi everyone. I think my response to that question is, well, obviously I spoke in the video about how it's part of a healing journey to read your records, and it is the narratives that you then take on as part of your identity. So for future proofing records and stuff like that, remember it's someone's life you're giving them, because for instance during your care journey you focus on things that make you feel safe, so that doesn't mean specifically you're going to remember every decision that's made around you and stuff. So that narrative that you're giving them is their life that you're actually handing them on that piece of paper, which means it's not just information, like you're not just recording information, that's someone's life. So it's important to put the relationship in those records as you're recording them.
Yeah, thanks Lee, that's so important. Tiff, anything that you wanted to add?
I think just on the backhand of what Lee said, just to be mindful that we as young people are actually going to be reading those records. We're going to see what you've said about us and the way that you've interpreted things in the wrong way, and we'll also see that if you've not been able to actually go deeper into what's going on as well, because it's quite clear in your records from conversations that have happened where maybe a worker's not cared as much as what you've said as someone else, and that'll bring back that fear of, oh, I don't want to open up and tell this person that because that one time, that one person, and it affects future relationships. It's not just about what's going on and coming back and reading your records, it's about moving on in the future and trying to rebuild relationships with other people around you as well. That has a major impact on it.
Thanks, Tiff, and that's been such a huge part of, I think, what everybody's said today about, how the power of records and how they can support healing as well. Sarah, I wondered if you had you've done a lot of work in this area. So, do you need me to repeat the question, or did you have a view on this subject?
Yeah, well, I mean, our own experience listening to our children and young people that they are looked after by our foster carers, it tells us a bit the same. No, it's about kind of like being conscious that at the end of the day we are talking about these children and these young people, and actually it's not just because we touch as well on the way that we communicate as well. So kind of like sometimes it looks like for some of them they were telling us that we are putting even more barriers, like we don't want us to be understood, like we are making things very obscure, like we are afraid of saying things. So I remember one young person saying it's like, it's like you are scared of telling me something, just like use plain language. And the other thing is as well, is about how we manage the difference of opinions. For a young person in recording, for example, something that happened, they might have a different view on it. So it's like about taking into account that even if the professional recording or even the foster care is not their own view. So it's about as well how we kind of like deal with that kind of situations, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does, Sarah, and I think what you're touching on there as well is, what whose needs is the record meeting. Similarly to the webinar we did last week on language, sometimes the language meets the needs of the workers rather than the children now and the adults that they'll become in the future. Chris, who you saw in the video, the real powerful video earlier on, he asked a really important question for the residential workers on the panel. So he's saying, as residential workers, and maybe Megan and I think Lynn, you might want to come in on this one as well. So I know you're not a residential worker, but he's saying, as residential workers, do you think it's okay to document every movement and every going on in a care experienced young person's life? how does this compare to how a parent or carer documents their child's life outside of the care system? So Megan, you got some thoughts on Chris's question?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question because it's something we talk about a lot in residential. I've been in residential now for about 10 years, and even back then we would document every time we woke a child up. So that would be at 9:10, 9:20, 9:45, etc. And we constantly have discussions within the team about, okay, so who's this relevant for? Is this relevant for us as a professional because we are wanting to document how that shift went for ourselves and for our colleagues who are coming on shift, or is that for the young person? So what we try to bear in mind and have at the forefront at all times is who we're writing this for. This document is for the young person. This is us, as Lee said, writing that young person's story. And is it relevant that they had a cheese sandwich for lunch that day? Is that important? Or is it relevant that actually you and that young person played a board game and someone won? And there's so much elements of the day that we really want to capture. So there has been times in the past that we've added photos to our daily record because there's been a photo taken that day that we want to keep and remember. So no, I don't think it's important to comment everything that's happened that day, but I know that has happened in the past, and I can imagine that young people and adults reading their care records will have every living breath documented. But no, that's not how we want to do it going forward, and that's not how we do it at the moment.
Thanks, Megan, and I'll bring in Lynn just in a moment. I just wanted to, you brought up a similar point to Mary Morris, who's from the Care Inspectorate. She talks about the importance of objects, tickets, photographs, and other ways of telling the story, and that's really important to remember. Not just for all children, but also for some children who may not be verbal and may not be able to access in the future their written records. So yeah, thanks for raising that. Lynn, any thoughts from you in relation to Chris's original question?
Well, I think, first of all, just to say that I think it was very, emotive hearing some of those accounts of care experienced children and the importance of the records. I think obviously I work in a children and families team, and I think that it really has given an emphasis of how important it is that it's not the social worker's story, it's the child's story. And I think that, if we look at the child's plans that we're writing, even in what we're discussing today, it's made me reflect that the child's views is a section at the very rear and the very back of a child's plan. And really, should the child's views needs to be more central. And I think that sometimes we don't integrate the child's views into the reports that we write. It's almost an add-on at the back. And I think that the promise and the momentum of that, I think, really needs us to make us think quite seriously about how we reflect and what we're writing about children. And although you were talking earlier about how much information to put in, I think sometimes the children that we're working with are saying that we don't put enough of the nitty-gritty in to our reports. What is the actual child, what is the child saying to us, and are we recording it accurately? And I think that there's always a risk and a danger that we sanitize and we don't actually say what the children have said to us. I think it's really important.
Yeah. So they're not sanitized, but there's a balance there to be had between the therapeutic nature, but also the accuracy and the support. And I think that I think perhaps it was Lee earlier on that said, actually it wasn't Lee, it was Linda earlier on that said around we do need the facts, but also we need the emotion behind that. We need to know how I was feeling at that time as well, and what it meant. So can I would love to bring in Mim and Kate and Peter, and we've got quite an interesting question here from Forrest Templeton. So and I think he's reflecting on how things are starting to move. He says he worked in residential children's homes about 20 years ago, and as Megan has highlighted, many things have changed, mostly for the better. How records were written then reflected the context of the times and the cultures that existed. So he's hinting that, you know, the cultures are starting to move on, and we have got a real great opportunity at this time. What his question is, what if anything can be done to rectify this for the future? And in addition, can any damage that has been done in the past be undone or made better? Maybe come to you, Mim, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well, Peter.
I suppose that's kind of the essence, really, of the Records project. And while the future-proofing part of it is how we can do things differently from now, if you like, the other part of the project that's being managed by Dana Clark, who manages our Scottish Peace Inquiry team, is doing work to look at the process for subject access. So while there are timescales for responding to requests for information and things like that, what they're trying to do is to look at how they can make that whole process more person-centered, understand the needs of the person making that request, and to ensure that they've got support from the person that they feel can best support them when they're going through when they are accessing a record that's been written historically. I suppose to as much as possible to reduce any secondary trauma or harm that might come from reading a record, understand what their expectations might be, and what they're hoping to gain from reading their record, so that they can make sure they support effectively. I think that was the challenge for us, thinking about how we write records better for the future. And I think that was why we found ourselves, it felt huge. I think the more we thought about it, the more we struggled to contain the beast, if you like. We could just feel it getting bigger and bigger, and found it difficult because we write so much. We write just about everything. You know, we're writing that we're constantly feeling as though we need to write in absolutely everything. And I suppose part of this project will be not only to look at the culture, or it'll be to look at the culture around writing, about why we write the way we do, why do people choose the language that they do, and also to help to support people to change their practice around that. So I think that's a real challenge for us as part of this project.
Thanks, Mim. And Lynn, I'll bring you in just a moment. I think Peter, just you spoke so eloquently and passionately earlier on about, you know, what young people have told us is the way forward. Do they have anything to say around you know, how we move this forward?
Yeah, I think the thing, and it's a theme that everybody's kind of touched on as well, is actually making young people and the person about whom the record is being written central to that record. If that means including them when we're actually writing it down and actually asking the young person for their feedback, if it means actually talking to the young person about why I'm writing a record, and young people might say, why are you writing what time I got out of bed? Like, it's just not relevant. And it may actually not be relevant at all at that, so we can kind of do away with it. I think the thing about records is that we tend not to write them for or to the young person. And Mim's talked about this before as well, they tend to be written for a kind of a social work or child protection type system in terms of how we record information and make sure that sort of, you know, we know what's happening and when, but it's not written to or for the young person. It's often the only record the young person has of their life, and there are a lot of missing pieces. And an example I can give you is when your care records aren't available, it creates an abyss and a chasm really within you in terms of missing pieces. So you can only sort of rely on bits and pieces. You have to kind of weave a story together yourself. I think if we protect these things and actually make young people central to how they're written and what they're written for and about, that's actually the way forward. And that's certainly what young people have said consistently, not just in Aberdeen, but across the country as well.
Brilliant. Peter, I'll bring Lynn in just a moment. I just want to give Kate a heads up that there's a really important question about the Data Protection Act coming up.
Oh, well, we can move to the Data Protection Act if you want, no problem. I was really just going to add there that I think that there's lots of things that we can start to look at. We can start to look at, you know, the importance of, you know, of what one of the contributors earlier said is about spending the time with that young person with their report. I think often draft reports are not shared with young people. We produce them for forums and we don't have that opportunity, or we don't give young people that opportunity to share them beforehand. I think if we look at you know, some of the later life letters sometimes that we write in adoption, where we're actually writing quite intricate personal details, and I think that sometimes in our records we don't really capture that. And I also think that in Aberdeen we are looking at producing life story work for older children, because I think research would tell us that it tends to be produced for the middle stage of a child's childhood. And I think, you know, some of the work that has been done in some of the you know, the homes, the children's homes within Aberdeen, I think is crucial, because we sometimes we don't focus on children at a later stage. So I think we're already starting to change the landscape of recognising the importance of records.
That's fantastic to hear, and we know that might not be happening at the same pace right across Scotland or elsewhere. Lee, jump in, please.
Yeah, it's actually just following on from what Peter was talking about there, about the chasm that's left when we don't have the memories and when you experience trauma, and especially trauma upon trauma, it affects how your brain retains the memories, and it causes, like, what I mean, I can only describe it as brain fog, where you don't have any of those answers and you've got no way of accessing them because they're so buried within your brain, because you can't remember it. Your body remembers it, so you're going through symptoms of trauma such as anxiety attacks, panic attacks, depression, and you can't explain where any of that comes from. And a lot of the time when you are accessing your records, that's filling in those blanks for you and helping you connect those dots. So you're not only helping someone heal their memories and the loss of those memories, you're helping an adult who is presenting with struggling symptoms such as anxiety, such as depression, stuff like that, connecting the dots so that they can then make a proper healing journey, in the sense of being able to actually name where their anxiety is coming from, name where that is, so that they can then work through that process of rewiring the neural pathways to then, so that trigger no longer causes that anxiety attack, that no longer causes that depression or that fog or all of these other things. So when you're giving them those records, you are connecting lots of dots. So that's important to remember, that you're not only helping the person's identity, you're also helping them understand themselves, their behaviours, their thoughts, and also helping them rewire, because you can't fix something if you don't know it. So if you're giving them that information so that they know it, you're helping them rewire and reconnect neural pathways that have been long forgotten because of the impact of the trauma that happened at that time. And it's really important to remember that that's what you're helping when you're moving on beyond the records.
That's incredible, Lee. Thanks so much for bringing that to the fore, but also the way that you just described that there. It's just so accessible to all of us, you know, on the panel and in the audience. Unbelievable stuff. Thank you. Mim, have you got just a brief point about that? What I want to do is just to manage our time in a way, and I feel really terrible to do so. We had originally, I think, aimed to finish at 12, but we still have a really strong audience listening. You as panel members might also have other places to go, so I'm going to suggest that we carry on until 15:15 and no further. If people need to leave, then they just they say cheerio and they switch off their camera, and we thank you so much for taking part. But I think because we still have a strong audience, we'll carry on for a bit longer. So Mim, do you want to come in briefly about that point, and then I do want to ask Kate another question that's come from the audience.
I think it was just to pick up on what Lee was saying. I think that's why we felt so strongly that this needed to be a multi-agency response to this. That we recognised that there was, we write records collectively, and that records start for somebody often before social work become involved, and that what we wanted to ensure was that there was a consistency of ethical approach around the way that we wrote for anybody really, but particularly if we thought that they were vulnerable. So it was just to pick up on that, I think, on Lee's point about, that we are writing somebody's story, and their story starts when they're little, so it was really important for us to ensure that everybody who contributes to that was involved in this improvement, really.
Brilliant. And if anyone has time to look at the CERSUS website, Louise Walwyn speaks quite eloquently about that. We've broken that her keynote from last year down into small blocks with sort of questions that might be supportive, and what she talks about is residential workers and social workers and others being lighthouses for children, and really, I think just chimes very strongly with what you, Mim, and Lee were just saying there. So might be worth a look if you have the time. Kate, it's a slightly technical question, but I think an important one in this. Lee and Tiff and others have talked about there being gaps in the knowledge, and how critically important it is to fill those gaps. And so Alana Bell is saying, hello, I have a question for the panel. I was just wondering if anyone had any thoughts or comments on the impact of the Data Protection Act, as it is quite explicit about the protection of third-party data, which can lead to the sometimes heavy redaction of files and record gaps. Thanks so much. I don't know how concise we can be around that, but it does seem to be an issue that repeatedly concerns people who are accessing their records.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important question, because we haven't touched on kind of redaction of information in records. That's something that features really heavily in all of the campaigning work, especially that Who Cares Scotland did in terms of access to records. And I think even just the graphics in the video that Peter spoke about, and in the Our Lives, Our Stories, Our Records report, you've got the kind of visual of the redacted parts of that. This is, I guess, troubleshooting this issue and working out in practice how we reduce the level of redaction of third-party information, especially when we're talking about family members and siblings, and how crucial that knowledge is to the narrative of a person and their identity. I think that there's just kind of a range of work that we're going to have to, or that is currently going on, at different levels. So from writing reports, including guidance, as much information, to professionals for recording that third-party information so that consent can be stored, so that there's as much kind of technical information that practitioners can use to obtain consent from third parties to share that information. At the kind of timescale that records are being written, as that's also accessible. However, whenever those records are kind of access to them is sought. Gosh, has anybody else got any kind of thoughts on kind of the different?
Yeah, please do come in if anyone wants to back up what Kate's saying. Mim?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's a conversation that had taken place as part of the other part of this project around about the issue around redaction. And I suppose going forward, what we were, the utopian idea would be that if we are writing with people, that if we're doing the writing, they're involved in seeing what we're writing before it's agreed as being final, that people are not this old, I suppose, this idea that we currently have about somebody making a subject access request to see what's written because they probably have never read what was written about them. But we would gradually move away from that because people would be more involved in seeing what was written about them as it was being written. It was being done more collaboratively with them.
Yeah, so that's that whole idea that you have in Aberdeen of future-proofing the system, which might not satisfy everyone right now, the adults right now who are accessing. I noticed that Peter wanted to come in on that point.
Just really, really quickly, there should be more of a balance, I guess, between protecting third-party rights and also the identity of individuals, and we need to kind of strike that a little more. And I think we're also aware that recently SCRA were talking about creating a more flexible approach to how that can kind of work as well. So it's good to see that there's some work, I guess, happening. But yeah, definitely. I mean, it's one of the things that we kind of tried to highlight in our little teaser video as well about the power of redacting, and it was the front cover of our report as well. So it's a major issue.
And you guys, Lucy's just been putting, Lucy who was presenting earlier on, she says Peter's got it covered. So you're a great double act, thanks for that. But perhaps Lucy, it might be helpful, Lucy's raising a number of points here around the work that's been done with SCRA, the Children's Reporters Administration, with the Information Commissioner, and some work around a balance between protecting third-party need with the need for the individual to know their history or identity. If there's anything that we could kind of share, even if it was an opinion piece, Lucy, that could be shared with the stuff that we're going to distribute, that sounds like it would be really helpful for people. I wanted to ask our audience, perhaps not in the way of a question, but well, a question to all. Reflecting, and perhaps you can put some of this in the comments, guys. Reflecting on your current recording practice and those of those around you, what is the one thing that you can commit to doing today that would make a positive change to your role or to your service? I hope that you've been inspired by some of the things that have been said today. It's occurred to me that we've probably got, we've got 9 people on the panel, and some of you have only had a chance to respond once or twice. But I think what that has given is people a real variety of response. Are there any questions from the panel to other panel members that we could, as we begin to finish off, is there anything that fascinated any of you about what each other was saying and you would want to ask of each other? There are more questions on there's many more questions coming from the audience, so I just thought that you might have that. So let's here's another one about the actual kind of the doing of the record, the recording practice, and this comes from Geraldine Keogh. I would like to ask how if a redesign of the chronology would be helpful in capturing a child's context. So rather than significant event and then action, could the word action be reconsidered? For example, rather than action, use the word impact on a child. Megan, it strikes me that you guys have been, really digging into how you record. Is that something that's come up for you?
I think that's a really interesting idea because, as you heard in the examples that we gave, we have been changing our templates to make them more child friendly. So the example that I gave in the risk assessments, and we totally changed that template. For the monthly care summary, again, we changed the template and the wording that was used. We've even on occasion changed a template to send a letter to the hearing system to be more young person friendly. So I think there's absolutely no reason why that can't be started even by one person to give the idea of I have this idea, let's see how it works. Even in our pathway plans in Aberdeen, we now write them as if it's written as if the young person's writing it. So I want to live in a happy home, or I want to have a full-time job and be financially okay. So the way that we write is really important. But I think why not try it? I think as well, for young people having the ability to share their good news through Mind of My Own, like Tiffany highlighted earlier, they can actually input positive things into their own chronology. So actually, this was the day that I became a prefect, or this is a day that I scored a goal and became the captain. And actually, there's no reason why they can't self-identify things that are positive that they want to share and have inputted into their life story and their chronology.
Yeah.
So yeah, why not?
Absolutely, yeah, and absolutely critical that, as you've mentioned there, that we record the positive and not just the more difficult things that have happened for children. Liz Mitchell is asking us. She's absolutely inspired by the collaborative work taking place in Aberdeen, and she's asking, how did you get buy-in from everyone, and do you have any tips or advice on how you achieved this? So that might be, you know, there are a number of you working around Aberdeen. Tiff, can you have a wee think about this? We'll maybe come to Mim and Peter, and I'm going to have to ask you to be very brief in your responses here, and then we'll come back to Tiff, and then we'll need to wrap up.
I think that's a really good question. I don't know that I've exactly got the answer. Luck, possibly, is partly it. I suppose taking the time, giving people the time. I think as a social work department, we'd probably already made some of that a shift in our thinking, and we've spent time with our partners, our partner agencies, giving them the time to think about what that means. I think Peter describes it really nicely, and so I'm going to let him talk. I'm perhaps going to let him use his organic word. But he talks about being quite an organic process, and I think I would agree with him, where lots of things have kind of just happened and kind of collided together. So by accident rather than by good design, some of it. I'll maybe let Peter answer some of that.
What I think the key points, and it's a really nice question, the key points are actually listening to what young people say and taking verbatim what they say as the truth, rather than questioning it and saying, oh, and coming up with blockages and kind of issues around it. And then actually talking to people who are like-minded, because if young people have this as an issue, other people will have it as an issue as well, and they will be concerned about it. And what we did was, we just started that conversation, and it is an organic process. And I know that people say an organic process actually means there's no plan and we don't know what will happen. And that's actually also part of it as well. But what we were relying on is that everybody is kind of keen to actually see this move for a whole bunch of different reasons. And that's why it actually grows by itself. Yeah.
And Tiffany, just to come to you, you've been working directly with young people, trying to support them and enacting their children's rights. What's come from that that's helped Aberdeen to move on in this way?
I think like a big part of it, like the video that we've done up in Aberdeen has been a massive part of this, because it is directly from young people themselves. We've noticed a big response from professionals around us. They seem to do things a lot more and have more understanding when, sorry, they can hear it directly coming from a young person. So sometimes we've experienced, you know, we've said something to a professional, they've went away and said it to a meeting. Oh, okay. A young person's went and said it in the same meeting, and it's, oh, hold on a minute, they take a step back and realise this is actually an issue because it's coming direct from a young person themselves. So really just a massive thing around support, and also when professionals are speaking about it to other people, think about if it was your child, your niece, your nephew, and any child at all. You know, I've got a 7-year-old, and I wouldn't like it if that was the way that I was going to be telling him when he's 16-year-old, okay, so here's your whole life. Like, it's not okay, and it's really degrading for a young person to have to read it in that format.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tiff. And Lee, I think I'm going to give you the final word before I wrap up. You answered the first question first. I think thanks so much to all the panelists. I'm so sorry that we haven't been able to hear more from all of you. But Lee, just in relation to that question, you've got more of a sort of national role, haven't you, in the campaign that Who Cares and others have been running. So what is it that will continue to drive the buy-in in this crucially important work?
I think the more of us willing to, the reason I got into health and social care in the first place is because of the fact I was fed up hearing that there was too much red tape. I think the more of us within our professional roles who are willing to cut the red tape and be more comfortable at stretching that I suppose the way we've always done it, the more people who are willing to buy into that, then the more right we're going to get it for our young people. And it's important that we are, future-proofing that for our young people, so that you don't have adults like myself who at 35 are having to repair, and that rupture was done a long time ago and I'm only just now repairing it at the age of 35. So if we can help our young people repair the ruptures that are being made, because that's why we end up with our young people in care in the first place, that is the rupture. If we're repairing that at the time when it's needed, then we won't have adults who are then having to make those repairs at a much later date, where they've had a much longer life of adversity, where it then does, it's not just that trauma at the time, it's like complex trauma of say 20 years, and we're not labelled with, more, I suppose more damaging labels, that because at the point that we're able to access the help we need, by that time we're more multiply disadvantaged than what we were originally. So we're making that important repair at the time of the rupture. So the more people who are willing to actually stand up for that and willing to push beyond the way we've always done it, cut the red tape. I mean, we've managed, especially during coronavirus, we've managed to cut a lot more red tape than we have ever done pre-coronavirus. So I think it's about being brave enough to continue to keep cutting that red tape and remembering how important it is for our young people and for our adults once they become adults. Like that's invaluable services, and that's invaluable love that you can put into those things. And it might just seem like a record for you, but it is so much more than that if you look at it in the grander scheme of things. So it's remembering that when you're pushed back from the powers that be or the system, whatever it is, just be brave enough to say, no, this is important to my young people. I know what I'm giving them.
And I think no one listening to the webinar presentations or this panel can doubt the importance and the power of really well-written, co-produced records. And thank you so much to all of you for really for hammering home that message to many of the people listening. And we've got a great audience today. Many of them are already converted to this, and if they're not, then we've hopefully moved the dial a little bit. They'll also be able to share the recording of this with colleagues, with friends, with their networks, and we'll continue to build this. And you guys have been a really important part in this. Thanks so much for your intelligence and your passion and your commitment to this and to taking part in the presentation. Thanks to our audience. We've not been able to get through all of the questions. We will try and scoop up the comments and find a way of sharing or responding to those. I've now gone over 6 minutes over my extra 15 minutes, so I think it's time to stop. So thanks so much, and we'll end the webinar there. Thank you.